Hey everyone, welcome back to the latest GoSkills Excel Challenge solution. How close did you get to solving it? Joining us is GoSkills' own Claudia Buckley with her solution. Check it out right now.
Ready to find out how I solved this challenge? Let's take a look at the data worksheet first. Each book's availability status is dependent on how many copies of that title the library owns and whether any of those have been borrowed. I used if and COUNTIFS to figure that out. COUNTIFS specifically because we want two conditions satisfied. One, transactions where the book ID matches each in the respective line, and the return date is blank, meaning that the book is still out on loan. Also, when I'm nesting formulas, I usually start with the inner function because the logic is generally easier to piece together that way. So I'm starting here with COUNTIFS, and we are counting transactions where the book ID, so once I click here, I've got the structured reference, is the same as the book ID here. So that's criteria number one. And we're also looking for transactions where the return date is blank. I'm going to close parentheses here because if you're new to nesting formulas or you just want to play it safe, it's a good practice to enter at this stage so that if it fails, you'll know right away. So we've got all these values returned here, and this tells us how many copies of each book are out on loan. Now we just need to compare this number against the number of copies owned by the library in each case. And we can wrap an if function around that to determine if we have copies available for loan or not. So I'm going to get in front here and I'm going to type if, open parenthesis. So if this number is less than the number of copies, then we want to return the text available. If not, then we'll return the text not available. And we hit enter. Perfect. All right, one down, couple more to go. Let's move on to the check worksheet. Looking up a student's name is a straightforward task. I used XLOOKUP because it's so easy. It has fewer limitations than VLOOKUP, but that's really up to you and maybe the version of Excel that you're on. So I'm starting with my XLOOKUP formula, and the value I'm looking up is the student ID here. Our lookup array is going to be in the students table, the student ID column, and the value I want returned is the name of the student. Close parenthesis here. And ID 0062 belongs to Kenneth Mitchell Jr. And how many books has Kenneth borrowed? Let's find out. This is similar to the book availability structure we worked out earlier, but from the student's perspective. So again, we're using COUNTIFS, and we're checking two conditions. Does the transaction's student ID match the ID that we're querying? And is the transaction's return date blank? Close parenthesis. So we have a value returned here. And for overdue fines, XLOOKUP will again do quite nicely. We're looking up the student ID, and we're going to do that here. But this time we want to know whether there are any overdue fines. And to determine if this student is allowed to borrow any more books, we'll need to find out whether they owe any late fees or they already have 5 books on loan. So this is going to be an if function because it's conditional. So we start with if, and our logical test is based on 2 possibilities. So we use or. If overdue fines is more than 0, or the total books borrowed is equal to 5, then their remaining allotment is 0. Otherwise, they can borrow 5 minus the total number of books that they already have. Close parenthesis, and we see that Kenneth is allowed to borrow 4 more books. All right, to look up a book title, we use XLOOKUP, book ID, and we are looking in our data tab. We want to match this book ID and return the title name, close parenthesis. And how do we know whether this book is available or not? So we use XLOOKUP. We're looking up the book ID, and we want to match it against the title here and return the status that we already worked out. Close parenthesis. This book is not available because all copies are out on loan. All right, now the earliest available date takes a little bit of thought. So let's start by entering that condition. So if the value in this cell says not available, then we'll want to search through the transactions where books have not yet been returned and which still have a future return date, because we can't really rely on those people who have overdue books. So let's enter the filter function, and the array that we'll want to return is just the due date column. So that's going to be the array that we want to see, but we'll need two conditions satisfied. So we'll need a parenthesis. We only want to see transactions where the book ID matches the book ID in cell G2, and we close parenthesis on this condition. We need an asterisk telling Excel that both must be satisfied. And our second condition is that we want transactions where the due date is in the future. So greater than or equal to today. And we close parenthesis on our second condition. So that's what we'll want to include in this array that's being returned. Now, it is possible that both of these conditions are not being met. That would simply mean that the book is overdue and we really have no idea when it's coming back in. So we are going to put an if empty argument here, and maybe we just want to see the word overdue if those conditions are not met. And this was our if function and the value if the book is not available. If the book is available, we don't need to do all that, so we just return an empty cell. Close parenthesis on our if, and it says this book is overdue, meaning it's been out for a while and we're not quite sure when it's coming back in. All right. Finally, let's head over to our transactions worksheet. Remember that our due date is going to be 21 days after the borrow date. That's easy. So we just add 21 here, and it's a table, so everything fills all the way down. And I found the number of overdue days the trickiest of all. There are basically 4 possible scenarios here. So we will need the ifs function, which returns a value based on the first condition it finds to be true. So if there's a return date, and it's earlier than or equal to the due date, then this book is not overdue. So that's a 0. Our second logical test is 2 conditions. So I'm going to need an AND function here, return date. So that's all covered up. I'm just going to copy and paste that here. So if the return date is equal to blank, and today is earlier than or equal to the due date, so I'm going to grab that again. If those 2 conditions are true, then that book is not overdue either. So that's where we have our 0. Our third logical test is if the return date is after the due date. So the book is returned, but it was returned late. So I'm copying this here, but it's after the due date. If that logical test is true, then calculate return date minus due date. And finally, our fourth logical test. That's also going to be a double condition. So we need our AND formula. So if the return date, that's this one, is blank, and today's date is after the due date. If those 2 conditions are true, then we'll need to work out today minus the due date. And that's the end of our ifs formula. And we've calculated the number of overdue days for each book that's outstanding. We're doing a quick visual check. This date is still in the future, so it's not overdue. And the same for these, because today's date is the 2nd of January. And overdue fees are $1 per day. So all we need to do is multiply overdue days by the number 1. And we have our answer here. This looks great, but I'm going to head over to our check worksheet so I can point something out to you. Take a look at this. Here we have a book where both copies are due back in on the same date. We really don't want to see that because we just want to see the earliest date. In fact, let's make it a little more realistic by putting in the 29th of December as our second date. So we have January 21st and January 19th as our expected dates back in, but we don't want to see them both. We only want to see the earliest one. Well, of course, we're getting an array because that's what the filter function returns. How do we make it return just the earliest function? Really easy. Just pop the small function in front of that, and we need the smallest value. So that's going to be the number 1 after our filter function. Close parenthesis on the small, insert a comma to separate our filter function from the if function, and we have January 19th. So everything looks great here. This is how I solve this challenge. Maybe you use some other method. We'd love to hear about it. Join the conversation on our Slack channel, and we'll see you next time.
So there it is. Did you get the same results? Did you use the same approach? Or did you try something different? We'd like to know. Share your take on the challenge in the comments below or join us for more discussion in our Slack channel. Link in the description. Thanks for participating and make sure to subscribe to this channel to get an alert when the next challenge is released. We'll see you then.